Well, this is my biography video on the father of modern missions, William Carey, and there is a ton to be said, so I'm going to jump right in with some early biographical stuff. Carey was born in 1761 England, where he was the oldest of 5 kids. His family by trade were weavers, so I think it's fair to classify them as a working class family. Relatively, they weren't super poor, but were not rich by any means either. He grew up in the Church of England and was baptized there, which is interesting in light of what we know about his later life, becoming the Baptist of Baptists, to say the least. He meets an interesting character by the name of John Warr in his teenage years while he's apprenticing at a cobbler shop. Up to that point, as Timothy George notes in his biography on Carey, that Carey had yet to experience a transformational conversion up to that point. He went to church with his family all the time and did the singing and the reading that was required there, but he notes that he had not yet experienced salvation through grace by faith in Christ. And that seems to be something that happened, a true conversion, when he starts hanging out with this guy Warr, who was giving him books and resources and witnessing to him every day at the cobbler shop. So Carey becomes entrenched in some new beliefs, and he gets really zealous about that sort of thing. And reading through some of his biographies, it seems like he may have been in the what Michael Horton calls the cage phase for New Calvinists. And I like to imagine him that way, seeing that firsthand. A few years later, he begins to settle in his beliefs a little bit. He starts hanging out with a bunch of particular Baptists, John Ryland Jr. and John Sutcliffe and Andrew Fuller, who would be a huge name in Baptist history. And he really starts to settle into being particular, for one, believing in the doctrines of grace and Calvinism and defending that valiantly at times. And also a Baptist, coming to the conviction that baptism of believers was biblical baptism. So around that time, he serves at a few different churches, one just as a preacher on every other Sunday with his friends John Ryland and Sutcliffe, and then later on he pastors 2 churches. And it was around this time that he really started to do a lot of reading of some of these guys that had gone to the new land, like Jonathan Edwards and David Brainerd and James Cook, and these were guys that were passionate about spreading the gospel to people who hadn't heard it yet. So Carey begins reading these guys and really develops a deep concern for spreading the gospel and carrying out the Great Commission. And he did a lot of work and writings in defending the Calvinist biblical view of missions, and specifically against hyper-Calvinism, who said that conversion was something that God would take care of without using the means of human missions. And Carey completely thought otherwise. It was shortly after this that he won a battle of ideologies of sorts with his Baptist peers, and specifically the hyper-Calvinists. He finally breaks through and is able to found a Baptist Mission Society, which at the time, and I had to write this one down, was called the Particular Baptist Society for the Propagation of the Gospel Amongst the Heathen, which sounds more like a thesis than a title. Nonetheless, this missionary society is founded. Carey is on his way to doing what he feels he's called to do. He accomplishes a ton of things once he finally gets to India. He dives into their culture. He learns their languages. He begins translating New Testaments and Old Testaments. He sets up a missionary community in Dutch colony. This place becomes sort of a hub for the missionaries that live in India, and they're able to be in community with one another and build each other up, and like I said, sort of have a hub for missions there. In the last 20 years of his life, it was just a whirlwind of gospel work by Carey. He tackled all kinds of new projects and accomplished great feats. A couple of the ones that stand out is that he completed a whole Bible translation in the language of Bengali. He published the New Testament in 2 other languages, the Old Testament in Sanskrit, which is a huge dialect in India. And he writes a complete dictionary of English and Bengali, which the amount of time and energy that would go into something like that is just mind-blowing. So he dies in 1834 after completing all kinds of gospel-centered missionary work in India, where he just set the precedent for what missions look like. And I've been greatly blessed and edified by being able to read his biography and do some research on him. And I will conclude by saying that any Christian, and specifically Christian student, needs to pick up some work on William Carey.